On the 29th of April 1945, Adolf Hitler calls his secretary Traudl Junge to his study in the Führerbunker beneath Berlin. In the small hours of the morning, he dictates his last will and testament to her, his voice urgent as Soviet artillery shakes the concrete walls around them. The four witnesses to this moment, Goebbels, Burgdorf, Krebs, and Bormann, will all be dead within 24 hours. Through the eyewitness accounts of those who lived through Hitler's final 10 days, we'll uncover how a delusional dictator's complete psychological collapse unfolded in real time as the Third Reich crumbled around him. 9 days before dictating his will, Hitler emerges from his bunker for what would be his final public appearance. April 20th, 1945, marks his 56th birthday, and it's the last time he comes to the surface from the Führerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. The ceremony takes place in the garden of the Reich Chancellery, amidst the ruins of a city under siege. Hitler presents iron crosses to members of the Hitler Youth, young boys, some as young as 12, being recognized for their bravery in defending the city against the advancing Soviet forces. The footage from this moment reveals a man already broken. Hitler's left hand visibly trembles as he greets the child soldiers, his once commanding presence now reduced to a fragile, sickly figure. Yet, stubbornly, he maintains the pretense of a confident leader, patting frightened children on the cheek and congratulating them as brave men defending the Reich. Armin Lehmann, one of the Hitler Youth members present that day, later recalled the Führer's appearance in that garden, a moment that would lead Lehmann to become one of his last couriers in the bunker's final days. After a brief gathering of top party and government officials in the bombed-out Reich Chancellery, Hitler spends his last birthday trapped within the suffocating confines of his underground Führerbunker. That same day, Soviet artillery begins shelling central Berlin, and tanks reach the city's outskirts by the evening of April 24th. Above ground, Berlin's civilians huddle in shelters as the Red Army closes in, terror mounting with each passing hour. 2 days later comes Hitler's complete psychological breakdown. On April 22nd, Hitler for the first time admits aloud that the war is lost. After ordering a failed counterattack, he erupts at his generals, blaming them for incompetence and betrayal, and announces he will stay in Berlin and shoot himself. The man who had promised a 1,000-year Reich screams that they have betrayed him, unable to accept that his own decisions led to this catastrophe. That evening, he asks his physician Werner Hasse about the most reliable method of suicide. Hasse recommends a combination of cyanide and a gunshot to the head. While Hitler's mental state crumbles, his most trusted allies are already preparing their escape routes. Hermann Göring tells Hitler on his birthday he has urgent business in southern Germany and must leave Berlin immediately. What Hitler doesn't know is that Göring is orchestrating the evacuation of his massive stolen art collection. Over 1,000 priceless works looted from Jewish families and museums across occupied Europe. Göring loads his treasures onto private trains bound for Bavaria, desperately trying to preserve masterpieces by Van Gogh, Botticelli, and Rembrandt. While Berlin civilians face starvation above ground, the Nazi elite's priority remains preserving their stolen wealth. The betrayals accelerate. On April 27th, a BBC radio report reveals that Heinrich Himmler, architect of the Holocaust, has been secretly negotiating surrender terms with the Western Allies through Swedish intermediaries. When Hitler hears this, his rage exceeds even his April 22nd meltdown. Hitler immediately orders Himmler's arrest, but the SS chief has already gone into hiding. The Nazi leadership that had sworn eternal loyalty is now scrambling to distance themselves from the regime's inevitable collapse, leaving Hitler increasingly isolated as Soviet forces close in on his underground fortress. Given that Himmler orchestrated the Holocaust, yet tried to negotiate his own survival while Hitler raged about betrayal, do you think any of Hitler's inner circle truly believed in the Nazi cause, or were they just opportunists? Drop your answer in the comments below. Now let's examine what happened when Hitler decided to get married in his final 48 hours. After midnight, on the night of 28 to 29th April, Hitler and Eva Braun were married in a small civil ceremony in the bunker. The event was witnessed by Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann. A 50-year-old municipal councillor named Walter Wagner appeared shortly before 1 a.m. on April 29th in the uniform of the Nazi Party and the armband of the Volkssturm. The ceremony took place in the cramped map room of the bunker, where just hours earlier Hitler had been screaming about betrayal and defeat. Wagner uncomfortably asked the Führer if he was a pure Aryan, as the Nazi race laws required. Hitler gave a cold, affirmative reply. Eva wore black. Hitler's voice was faint and slurred. Above them, Soviet artillery pounded Berlin into rubble while civilians fled in terror. Below ground, Hitler insisted on maintaining the racial purity requirements of a regime that would be extinct within hours. When Eva signed her marriage certificate, she wrote the letter B for her family name, then crossed it out and replaced it with Hitler. Eva Braun had waited over a decade to become Eva Hitler, but she would hold that title for less than 40 hours. Hitler then hosted a modest wedding breakfast, a pathetic echo of the grand state ceremonies he once commanded. While his new bride celebrated with champagne in the bunker, Berlin's civilians faced systematic execution by both Soviet forces and Nazi firing squads. That morning, the bunker received news of Mussolini's execution by Italian partisans, reinforcing Hitler's determination that neither he nor Eva should face a similar fate. The wedding witnesses embodied the regime's final collapse. Goebbels would be dead within 48 hours alongside his wife and 6 children. Bormann would die fleeing Berlin, and Wagner had been pulled from street fighting to perform the ceremony before returning to defend a city already lost. Even as his world collapsed, Hitler maintained bizarre routines. Every morning at precisely 11:00 a.m., his valet Heinz Linge would wake him and provide morning newspapers and messages. Hitler would then dress himself to a stopwatch with Linge acting as a referee. A childish game that continued as Soviet shells shook the bunker walls. His barber, August Vollenhaupt, described Hitler as a genial, soft-spoken man who always wanted to know the latest gossip from the street. Hitler would take a light breakfast of tea, biscuits, and an apple, a vegetarian lunch at 2:30 p.m., and dinner at 8 p.m., maintaining the pretense of civilized routine while his regime murdered civilians in the streets above. Meanwhile, Goebbels delivered his final propaganda broadcast on April 29th, calling on Berliners to fight to the death. I call on you to fight for your city. Fight with everything you have got, for the sake of your wives and your children, your mothers and your parents. The propaganda minister, who had spent years crafting Hitler's image, now demanded that families sacrifice themselves for a leader hiding underground, planning his suicide. As preparations for death began in earnest, Hitler's SS bodyguards destroyed his personal papers. Dr. Werner Hasse was instructed to poison Blondie, Hitler's Alsatian dog, and Eva's spaniel. Hitler then declared Himmler a traitor and had his SS representative Hermann Fegelein, Eva Braun's own brother-in-law, taken out and shot. Hitler was executing those closest to him while maintaining the fiction of afternoon tea and evening dinners in his underground tomb. The psychological collapse was complete. a man clinging to domestic routines while orchestrating death around him. At 2:30 in the afternoon of April 30th, 1945, Hitler and Eva Braun entered his private study in the Führerbunker. Outside, SS Sturmbannführer Otto Günsche stood guard, while the remaining bunker inhabitants waited in the corridor above. A single shot rang out. Minutes later, Valet Heinz Linge entered the study and discovered a scene that would mark the end of the Third Reich. Linge reported the smell of gunpowder and of burnt almonds, the telltale scent of cyanide. Inside, Hitler sat slumped on the sofa, a bullet wound visible at his right temple. A Walter PPK lay at his feet. Eva Braun was next to him, lifeless, her face contorted from poison. The dictator who had promised a 1,000-year Reich was dead after just 12 years in power, his new wife of less than 40 hours beside him. Following Hitler's explicit instructions, their bodies were wrapped in blankets, carried up the emergency exit stairs, and placed in a shallow bomb crater in the garden behind the Reich Chancellery. There, as Soviet shells continued to fall, they were doused in petrol. The first attempt to ignite them failed. Bormann fetched a thick bundle of papers, lit them, and threw them on the corpses. A dozen loyalists raised their arms in one final Nazi salute as the flames consumed the bodies. The next evening, May 1st, brought the most horrific aftermath. Joseph and Magda Goebbels arranged for an SS dentist, Helmut Kuntz, to inject their 6 children with morphine so that when they were unconscious, an ampule of cyanide compound could be crushed in each of their mouths. The children, Helga, 12, Hildegard, 11, Helmut, 9, Holdine, 8, Hedwig, 6, and Heidrun, 4, were murdered by their parents in Berlin on May 1st, 1945, the day both parents committed suicide. They had been playing and singing in the bunker just hours before their deaths. When Soviet troops entered the bunker a day later, they found the children's bodies in night clothes, with ribbons in their hair. A Soviet autopsy of Helga's body noted several black and blue bruises, indicating she probably woke up and struggled with her killer. Even in the regime's final hours, the Nazi leadership's fanaticism demanded the sacrifice of innocents who had no choice in their fate. Hitler's final 10 days revealed the complete disintegration of a delusional mind that had plunged the world into war. From his last public appearance on his birthday, through the betrayals of his closest allies, to his underground wedding and final suicide, the eyewitness accounts of those in the bunker show how a man who once commanded millions died, isolated and broken. The psychological collapse was total. A dictator who had promised to reshape the world reduced to a trembling figure in a concrete tomb, taking his delusions to the grave while his followers murdered children in his name. Subscribe for more untold W12 stories and watch our deep dive into the Battle of Berlin next.